This is Alan Edwards, and this is the third in the series of videos on using StartLine. This one is the race screen, which is the screen that comes on just after the start, after you cross the starting line, and for all of the marks. It'll automatically switch from mark to mark if you have your route set up. And I'm just going to go through the various different things. There's of course,
right 44.
The app will talk. There's like 10 different modes that you could set it to give various different
right
things.
44.
This one is just giving the direction to the next mark. I'm going to turn that off. And in this case, right 44. If you wanted to go all the way to the ley line, you'd go to your target turn, which is shown down there at 97 degrees. And that's a function of the wind and the boat, the targets that you've entered. So that's turn. That's called turn. That's a common GPS term. The next is the time to the waypoint, which is useful, of course, in deciding when to take down spinnakers and sail changes, and generally useful for the crew. And then this section I'll talk about last. The ley line, the distance to the ley line, which is an alternative to using the turn. I prefer the turn, but it's also interesting sometimes to see the distance to the ley line. This can jump around a lot. It's very sensitive to a degree or so. And then finally there's a scroll area that tells various different things. It starts with telling what the mark is you're headed to, the wind that you have set, the current that you have set, the next leg and the apparent wind of the next leg, and then the rounding. So this is a round starboard on the W mark. Now you might notice here that we have the current set to 1.6 knots at, where is it? 190. Now we could go directly into the current screen and see that this is manually set. It's not what's read from the, excuse me, the race box, but you could get that by asking for actuals, and then you could return. And the actuals are read here. So this reading without the race box will just be zeros. The speed over ground, course over ground, the target knots given the wind that you have entered, the target turn, again given the wind, the nautical miles to the mark, and the heading to the mark, the shift. So if you get a wind shift, if you change your heading, it'll show up as a wind shift. And then the last tack, in this case was 0 degrees, but you can see there's no data. We're not actually racing. But there would be a list of the last and all of the tacks that you've done, and you can see that way what it's an alternative to looking at just the target. You can see, okay, what have actually been going on with the current and all that I've gotten. Go back up here, the sound on and off. Mark, you hit that, it just records a mark, a time. So you might hit that when your competition crosses the finish line, if you want to know, and then you compare that against your finish. You can see if you made up your handicap. This is up and down, and that changes, of course, the target, whether you're using upwind targets or downwind targets. And the 215 is the distance to the other ley line. So this is useful for knowing if you're in the middle of the course, or whether if you do see that you've gotten a shift, whether it's worth tacking. If you're too close to the ley line, you may not want to tack. This is the leg number. And then if you, for some reason, want to switch where you're going, if something goes wrong, you can manually switch the mark that you're going to. That might happen if, for example, you just have a mark entered in the wrong place. You don't get close enough to it. You have to get a certain distance to the mark in order to trigger the automatic switching, and then that actually switches when you've gotten within the distance, I think it's 100 meters, and you're leaving. So it'll switch when you're around the mark. So that's the race screen.